The planet was silent. The wind swept across its barren surface, a soft yet constant whisper that filled the empty spaces. A single outpost stood alone, isolated from the rest of the universe. It was a place meant for punishment, a place where the world's most powerful and proud could be forgotten. This was where she had been sent, an alien woman of noble blood and immense power, reduced to nothing but a shadow of her former self. Her name was Zayara, and she had once been a leader among her people. The highest of her kind, she had once commanded respect and fear. But that was before the betrayal, before the whispers of treason echoed through the palace halls, before she had been cast aside like an object of no value. Now Zayara was nothing more than an exile, a prisoner to the system she had once controlled. She spent her days in solitude, her only company the occasional drone that would bring her food or supplies. The station was bare, cold, and distant. The walls, gray and lifeless, stood as a constant reminder of her fall from grace. It was a cruel punishment, meant to strip away all remnants of her pride and dignity. And yet, the silence of the planet did nothing to ease her mind. It only deepened her sense of isolation, a reminder that she was alone. The halls echoed with emptiness. Zayara often found herself staring out the small window of her room, watching the swirling dust storms that marked the horizon. There was nothing here, nothing to connect her to the life she had lost. The stars above, once familiar and full of meaning, now felt distant. The vast expanse of space no longer held the promise of adventure or discovery. It was simply a reminder of how far she had fallen. She had been sentenced to this forsaken planet by the very people she had once called her allies. Her enemies had conspired against her, planting false accusations and turning her own people against her. The political games had been too much for her to navigate, and in the end, they had stripped her of everything she had worked for. Her title, her wealth, her standing, gone in an instant. Zayara had been left with nothing but the harsh wind and the empty desert. But even in her isolation, her mind could not stop racing. She thought about the past, about the empire she had once served, the empire that had once been her world. She had loved her people, believed in their cause, and fought to keep the peace. But that had all been before the war, before the conflict with the humans had escalated beyond control, before the bloodshed had begun. Zayara had once believed that war was a necessary evil, that it was the only way to ensure peace. But as the years went on, as the battles piled up, she began to question the wisdom of such thinking. She had seen too many lives lost, too many families torn apart by the violence. She had seen the pain in the eyes of the soldiers who fought, the children who cried for their lost parents. War, she had come to understand, was a poison. And yet she had been a part of it, leading her people into battle against an enemy that was far from what they had imagined. The human race had been underestimated. They had been written off as primitive, insignificant beings, unworthy of attention. But Zayara had seen the truth. She had witnessed their strength, their resilience. And though she would never admit it aloud, she had come to admire them in some strange way. They fought with a ferocity that matched her own people's, with a determination that made them formidable opponents. It was this very truth that had led to her downfall. Her decision to negotiate peace with the humans had been met with outrage from the council. They had seen it as a weakness, an act of betrayal, and so they had turned against her, casting her aside as though she were nothing. Zayara's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden shift in the air, a subtle vibration in the station. Her heart skipped a beat, and she stood up, walking toward the window with a sense of urgency. Her sharp eyes scanned the horizon, and her pulse quickened when she saw the distant outline of a ship, a human ship. At first, she thought it was a mirage, a trick of the mind, but as the ship grew closer, the unmistakable hum of its engines filled the air. It was real. A human vessel approaching her station. Zayara's mind raced with possibilities. Why would a human ship be here? This was a place of exile, a place where nothing of importance ever happened. Yet here they were, drawing closer with every passing moment.
Her hands trembled as she reached for the communication console, but then she hesitated.
There was no reason to contact them. She was nothing to them. But curiosity tugged at her. What was their purpose? Why had they come? Zayara turned away from the console. Walking to the door and stepping into the hallway, she made her way to the landing bay where the ship was now preparing to land. As she stood there, waiting, a strange feeling washed over her. It was a mixture of excitement and dread, of hope and fear. What if this human was her chance to escape? What if he was the key to her freedom? The ship touched down with a soft thud, and the hatch slowly opened. A human stepped out, his figure silhouetted against the light. Zayara's heart skipped a beat. He was taller than she had expected, with dark hair and a weathered face. His uniform was simple, worn from travel. But what caught her attention the most was the look in his eyes. There was something about him, something that made her feel as though she had been caught in his gaze. His eyes were filled with a quiet strength, the kind of strength that had taken her years to recognize in herself. He stepped forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. Zayara's pulse quickened as she watched him approach. For a moment she wondered if he could sense the weight of her past, the burden of the life she had led. But as he drew closer, she realized that he had no idea who she was. To him, she was just another alien, another exiled prisoner on a forgotten world. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze meeting hers. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a calm, steady presence. Zayara opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was unsure what to say, unsure of what this encounter meant. He was a human, after all, a race she had once seen as insignificant. Yet here he was, standing in front of her, offering something she had not felt in a long time. Connection. The human broke the silence, his voice gruff but warm.
I wasn't expecting company.
The wind outside howled against the walls of the station, a constant reminder of how isolated Zayara had become.
She stood in front of the human, unsure of what to make of the encounter.
His presence was unexpected, his arrival unannounced. For so long she had been alone, her thoughts her only companions. Now, standing before her was a man from a species she had once considered insignificant. Yet, there was something in his gaze that made her pause. It was a steady, unflinching look that did not waver under the weight of her status. He did not bow or show any sign of fear. In fact, he did not seem to recognize her at all, and perhaps that was what unnerved her the most. I wasn't expecting company, the man said again, his voice low but filled with a quiet kind of warmth. Zayara blinked, momentarily lost in the simple truth of his words. Company. It had been so long since anyone had referred to her as such. She had been an exile, a ghost in a dead world. She had come to terms with her isolation, but now, faced with a stranger who did not view her as a prisoner or a symbol of failed diplomacy, she found herself unsure of what to say. She glanced at the human more closely. His clothes were simple, his uniform worn from travel and the harsh conditions of space. His features were rugged, marked by experiences that spoke of battles fought far from the peaceful ideals she had once believed in. He looked as though he had seen death and destruction, but his eyes told a different story. There was no anger there, no bitterness, just a quiet resolve, as though the weight of the universe had yet to break him. Zayara opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. She had not spoken to anyone in so long that she had forgotten how. Instead, she simply nodded in acknowledgement, stepping aside to allow him entrance into the station. The human hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to push forward or turn back, but, after a beat, he stepped past her and into the small room. Zayara followed, closing the door behind them, the hum of the station filling the silence that followed. The room was small, utilitarian, nothing more than a space for her to eat and sleep. There was no decoration, no comfort. The walls were bare, stripped of any warmth or life. The only personal touch was the small window that allowed her to stare at the barren landscape outside, a vast emptiness that mirrored the space in her heart. The human looked around the room, his gaze scanning the sterile environment with a quiet curiosity. Zayara watched him as he took in the surroundings, noting the lack of personal belongings. There was no warmth here, no sign of a life that had once been lived. But what else could she expect? This place was designed to strip her of her identity, to erase any trace of the power and prestige she had once held. It was a prison. Plain and simple. "So," the human said, breaking the silence again, "what's your name?" Zayara was taken aback by the question. A simple question, yet one that she had not been asked in so long. Her name. She had almost forgotten the weight it once carried. For a moment, she hesitated. She was no longer Zayara, the leader. She was no longer the one who had once commanded armies and bent the will of others. She was nothing. Exiled. Forgotten. But the human was looking at her, waiting for an answer. She knew she had to respond. "Zayara," she said, her voice soft, almost unfamiliar to her own ears. The human nodded slowly, as though the name meant something to him. "Zayara," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I'm Callum." The name seemed simple, ordinary, but in that moment it felt like a lifeline. Callum. A name that didn't come with expectations, a name that didn't carry the weight of 100 years of history. He was just a man, and that, in itself, was strangely comforting. There was another silence, one that stretched between them, thick with the uncertainty of their meeting. Zayara wondered what Callum was thinking. Did he see her as a symbol of failure? A fallen leader, cast aside by her people? Did he know the truth of what had happened, or was he simply here by accident, a wanderer lost in the vastness of space? "I'm surprised to see anyone here," Callum said, breaking the silence once more. "This place is a dead end." "I thought it was abandoned." Zayara nodded, understanding his confusion. This was not a place for the living, not a place for those who had hopes or dreams. It was a place for those who had nothing left to lose, those who had been discarded. "It was," she said quietly. "I was exiled here." Callum's expression softened, and for the first time, Zayara saw a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. "Exiled?" he asked, his voice low. "Why?" Zayara glanced away, her gaze turning to the window, as if the answer could be found in the vast emptiness outside. She had not spoken of her past in so long, and part of her wondered if it was even worth mentioning. But something in Callum's voice made her reconsider. There was no judgment in his eyes, no pity, just curiosity, the kind of curiosity she had not experienced in years. I was once a leader," she began slowly, her words tentative. "I commanded armies, led my people through wars, made decisions that shaped the fate of entire worlds. But the humans, our conflict with them, it led to my downfall. I tried to broker peace. I thought it was the only way to stop the bloodshed, but my people did not see it that way." She paused, her voice thick with the weight of her memories. It hurt to say the words, to admit her failure out loud. The pain of losing everything, of being discarded like a broken tool, was still fresh, but somehow with Callum standing before her, it felt easier to speak the truth. "They turned against me," she continued. "Accused me of betrayal, of weakness. And in the end, I was cast aside, exiled here, to a world no one cares about." Callum stood quietly listening, his expression thoughtful. Zayara couldn't read his thoughts, but she could feel the weight of his gaze, the way he took in her words. For a moment there was no distance between them, no walls built by race or past history. There was only two people, connected by their shared isolation. "You did what you thought was right," Callum said after a long pause. "And sometimes, that's all we can do. You can't control how others react." Zayara looked at him then, surprised by the kindness in his voice. It was a simple statement, but it struck her more deeply than she cared to admit. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, not everything she had done had been in vain. She had made mistakes, yes, but she had also tried to save lives, to prevent further suffering, and that mattered, didn't it?
"I didn't expect," Zayara began, trailing off. She didn't know what she expected, but the fact that Callum was here, standing in front of her, offering her kindness, was more than she could have imagined.
The world felt a little less empty now, a little less cold. Callum smiled faintly. "You didn't expect a human to care, did you?" Zayara nodded, feeling a strange warmth spread through her chest. "No, I didn't. Well, I'm not like most people." For the first time since her exile, Zayara felt a spark of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It was hope, fragile but real. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next as the quiet of the outpost settled around them. Zayara found herself spending more time with Callum than she had ever expected. At first, their conversations had been tentative, guarded, but as the days stretched on, a strange bond began to form between them. They shared stories of their worlds, their lives, and their struggles. Despite their differences, there was a connection that neither could deny. Zayara had long since forgotten what it was like to speak freely, to share her thoughts with someone who was not judging her or looking for a way to use her. But Callum listened to her, truly listened. He never interrupted or dismissed her feelings. He simply let her speak, and in return she began to open up in ways she hadn't in years. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the barren landscape, Zayara and Callum sat together on the small porch outside the station. The air was cool, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and the faint hum of the wind. "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. Zayara turned her gaze to him, surprised by the question. It was the first time he had asked about the future, about what she planned to do now that they had met. For so long she had been content to let the days pass without purpose. But now, with Callum's presence in her life, she found herself thinking about the possibilities. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. "I've never really had a choice before. I was always told what to do, who to be. I thought my life was already written." Callum nodded, as if understanding.
"It's hard, isn't it, to feel like everything you do has already been decided for you?" Zayara nodded in return, the weight of his words settling over her.
She had spent so many years following orders, doing what was expected of her, that she had forgotten how to live for herself. Her entire identity had been tied to her role in the Empire, to the power she once wielded. Now, without that power, she was adrift. She had no purpose, no direction. And yet, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she realized that she didn't mind. Perhaps it was time to create her own path. I think I've been running from who I really am," Zayara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so long hiding behind my title, behind what I was supposed to be. But I don't know who I am without it." He simply sat beside her, looking out at the horizon, his face bathed in the soft glow of the fading light. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind of silence that spoke volumes without needing words. "I don't have all the answers," Callum finally said, breaking the stillness. "But maybe you don't have to have all the answers right now. Maybe it's okay to just be, to take things one day at a time."
Zayara looked at him then, really looked at him. For the first time, she saw something beyond the surface.
There was a depth to him, a quiet strength that seemed to come from years of facing hardships and rising above them. He was a man who had seen war, who had fought battles and faced death. Yet there was no bitterness in his eyes. There was no anger or resentment. He was at peace with himself, in a way that Zayara didn't think was possible. "You're right," she said slowly, as if testing the idea. "Maybe it is okay to just be." Callum smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. It was a small gesture, but it made something inside Zayara stir. She had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, truly seen, by someone else. She had been so focused on her role as a leader, as a figure of power, that she had forgotten the simple joy of being human. For the first time since her exile, Zayara felt a sense of peace settle over her. It was a fragile peace, one that could easily be shattered by the weight of her past, but it was a start. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that, for the first time in a long while, she was not alone. She had Callum, and that was more than she could have hoped for. As the days continued to pass, Zayara and Callum found themselves falling into a routine. They spent their mornings exploring the station, fixing what needed to be repaired, and cleaning the areas that had been neglected during her exile. They would sit together in the afternoons, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts and their dreams for the future. Zayara found herself laughing more than she had in years, her heart lightening with each passing day. There were moments, of course, when the weight of her past would come rushing back, when the memories of her people and her empire would overwhelm her. But Callum was always there, steady and patient, offering her a quiet reassurance. He never pushed her to talk about things she wasn't ready to face, but when she did open up, he listened with a depth that made her feel safe. One evening, as the stars began to fill the sky, Zayara found herself sitting beside Callum once again, watching the endless expanse above them. The silence stretched out between them, but this time it was different. It was comfortable, peaceful. "You know," Zayara said, her voice thoughtful, "I used to look at the stars and feel like they were mocking me, like they were a reminder of everything I had lost. But now, I don't know." "It's different." Callum glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Different how?"
Zayara took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. "Now, when I look at the stars, I don't feel like I'm alone anymore."
"It's like they're just part of something bigger, and I'm part of it too."
Callum didn't respond right away.
He simply nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. For a moment the two of them sat in silence, their thoughts intertwined in a way that words couldn't capture. Zayara realized then that she had begun to find her way again. It hadn't been easy, and there were still many obstacles ahead. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was moving forward. The weight of her past no longer felt like an anchor holding her back. It was still there, of course. She could never forget what had happened, what she had lost, but it no longer defined her. She was more than her title, more than her past mistakes. She was Zayara, and she was free to choose who she wanted to be. And for that, she was grateful. The days grew warmer, and the station, once a place of isolation, had become a home of sorts. It wasn't much, just a small outpost at the edge of a forgotten world. But with Callum's presence, Zayara found herself slowly rediscovering a sense of purpose. The long stretches of silence no longer felt oppressive. Instead, they gave way to conversations, to the gentle rhythm of life that she had once thought lost forever. Zayara had never thought she would find herself in a place like this, not after everything she had known. She had once been a leader, a commander of armies, a figure of power and authority. But all of that felt so far away now, as if it had happened to someone else, someone she no longer recognized. In its place there was this quiet life, one built not on duty or expectations, but on something simpler, something softer. The small joys of day-to-day life were beginning to feel meaningful again. In the mornings, she would join Callum outside, helping him with the repairs on the station. The tasks were simple: checking the power systems, cleaning the equipment, making sure the station was still functioning. But there was something comforting in it, something grounding. It was a reminder that even after everything that had happened, life still moved forward. There was still work to be done, still a purpose to serve, even if that purpose wasn't as grand as it once was. During the afternoons, they would sit together, sharing stories from their pasts. Callum spoke of his life back home, of the battles he had fought, and the things he had seen. Zayara listened, fascinated by his experiences. He had lived a life full of struggle, just as she had, but his words never carried the bitterness that often colored her own memories. He spoke of loss, but also of hope, of how he had survived by clinging to the belief that things could get better, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. Zayara shared her own stories too. She told him about her rise to power, the early days when she had believed in the cause she was fighting for. She spoke of her time as a leader, the weight of responsibility that came with it, and the way that power had corrupted her world. She talked about her exile and the years of solitude that followed. But it was different now. Talking about the past didn't make her feel as if it were still consuming her. She could speak of it without the same pain, the same bitterness that had once been so overwhelming. The evenings were the best part. They would sit outside, watching the stars, sharing a quiet meal together. The nights on this planet were clear and crisp, the sky filled with a sea of stars that stretched on forever. Zayara had once found the stars a reminder of everything she had lost, a vast, uncaring universe that had left her behind. But now, as she looked up at the twinkling lights, she saw something different. The stars were not a reflection of her isolation. They were part of something much bigger, a universe full of endless possibilities. And for the first time in years, Zayara felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find her place in it again. Callum seemed to feel it too. There were moments when their eyes would meet, a silent understanding passing between them. They had both experienced loss, both seen the worst of what the world could offer, but they had also found something in each other. It was a bond forged through shared experience, but also through something else, something deeper. They didn't need to speak it aloud, but it was there, a quiet force that had begun to shape their days together. One night, as the stars shone brightly above them, Zayara found herself thinking about the future. It was a thought that had once terrified her. The future had been nothing more than a continuation of her past mistakes, a cycle of failure that she couldn't escape. But now, as she sat next to Callum, watching the stars, she felt something shift within her. For the first time in a long time, she was beginning to see the future not as something to fear, but as something full of possibility.
"What happens next?"
she asked quietly, breaking the silence. Callum turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "Next?" he repeated, as though the word itself had taken on new meaning.
I don't know, Zayara. I think
we just keep going, one step at a time." Zayara nodded, her gaze drifting back to the stars. For so long, she had been waiting for some grand moment, some sign that would tell her what to do next. But now, sitting here with Callum, she realized that maybe that wasn't how life worked. Maybe it wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment. Maybe it was about creating that moment, about choosing to move forward, no matter how small the steps were. "And what about you?" Zayara asked, turning to him. "What happens to you?" Callum was quiet for a moment, as if the question had caught him off guard. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "I'm not sure," he said finally, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "But I know I'm not leaving here. Not yet." Zayara studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly. She had known there was more to him than just a soldier, more than just the man who had arrived at her outpost, but she hadn't pushed him to talk about his past. She hadn't wanted to pry. Still, there was something in his voice now, something that hinted at a depth she hadn't yet explored. "You don't have to stay here, you know," she said softly. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," Callum replied, his voice steady. But maybe, I do. Not in the way you think, though. I'm here because I want to be. I'm here because, for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. Zayara blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. She didn't know what she had expected. But it wasn't this. She had thought he might feel obligated, that he might see their bond as something to escape from, to run away from. But he wasn't. He was staying, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. I don't know what the future holds, Sayara, Callum continued, his eyes meeting hers.
But I know I'm not facing it alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, Zayara felt a surge of emotion she couldn't name. It was a mixture of gratitude, relief, and something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years.
She had been alone for so long, locked away in her own thoughts, in her own isolation. But now, standing beside Callum, she felt something stir inside her. It was a sense of belonging, of being seen for who she truly was, not as a leader or a symbol of power, but as a person. I think I'm starting to understand what you mean, Zayara said softly, her voice filled with quiet wonder.
Maybe it is enough to take things one day at a time. Maybe I don't need to have all the answers right now.
Callum smiled at her, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Exactly. Just take it one step at a time. Zayara nodded, feeling something in her chest unclench. For so long, she had been weighed down by the expectations of others, by the need to live up to a legacy that no longer felt like her own. But now, in this small outpost on a forgotten planet, she was beginning to find her own way. As the night stretched on, and the stars twinkled brightly above them, Zayara realized that the future didn't have to be a source of fear. It could be a path forward, one step at a time. And for the first time in years, she felt ready to take that step together.